Greetings to you all, and thank you for standing by. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, How Patient Personas Can Drive Market Expansion for Pharma. My name is Al Salchunas, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Before we get to the presentation, I do have a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, so no need to put your ringer on silent. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website by next week. Although lines are muted, we do encourage you to ask questions during today's presentation. Please submit any questions using the questions window located on the right side of your screen. Type your question into the box, click send, and they will be sent directly to a meeting organizer to queue for the Q&A session we will host at the end of the webinar. Should you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please also utilize the questions window to describe your issue, and one of our support staff will follow up with you to troubleshoot. Within the webinar, we will also have a few polling questions to gather your input. When we reach those points, I'll read off the question, and you'll be able to select from a list of options. With that, I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I'm happy to introduce our speakers today. John Pagliuca, SCIO's Vice President of Life Sciences, leads the global commercialization efforts of SCIO's advanced analytics and software as a service solutions within the life sciences market. He has nearly 20 years of sales, marketing, and technology experience in quantitative analytics and software solutions for life sciences. Mark Feeney is a life sciences consultant at SCIO. He holds a master's degree from Binghamton University and has spent 20 years in the life sciences industry. Mark's area of specialty include project and operations management for commercial effectiveness and patient analytics applications, including HCP targeting, patient segmentation and longitudinal analysis, Salesforce restructuring, key opinion leader identification, physician influence analysis, and multi-channel marketing analysis. And now, without further ado, please welcome John Pagliuca.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar. Good morning for those of us here in the States. Good evening, good afternoon for those of us outside the U.S. We're going to spend a little bit of time today. Quick overview of who SCIO is for those of you who may not know or know much about SCIO Health Analytics. A deep dive overview of the SCIO's patient persona modeling, and then, of course, tactical application and common uses of those persona models, followed by some Q&A. But again, as Al pointed out, Q&A could happen anytime throughout the presentation, so please feel free to ask away. A little bit of a backgrounder on SCIO. Again, I'll be brief. We are headquartered in West Hartford, Connecticut. We are 10 years old. We have a global footprint. We have roughly 1,100 employees globally. 50% of those sit in a beautiful office in Chennai, India. The other 47 or 48% of them sit here in the U.S. Through 5 locations scattered across the U.S. And we have a small office outside of London in Slough. Exciting place to visit every once in a while. And a little bit of a trivia for folks. If you are, in fact, fans of the original show, The Office, it's based on Slough. So a little bit of a trivia there. Our background, our DNA is healthcare analytics. We are an equal part healthcare analytics company and equal part technology solutions company. We have 50-plus data scientists. We have 300-plus coding and claims experts, 200-plus clinicians, 250 or so data technology and data experts. Where we excel is taking vast amounts of data, today known as big data, probably an older term, but taking vast amounts of data, whether that be through third-party sources or through our clients or combination of both, codifying that data into structured environments, and not only telling clients or informing clients descriptively of what has happened, but prescriptively what's going to happen next and what to do about it. And that's really where SCIO excels, and where SCIO has made its name in the last 10 years in the healthcare vertical, and specifically these days in life sciences, working on the commercial side of life sciences. So we've got a great team, great number of partners as well. Our verticals, if you will, of expertise, again, we have a vast knowledge of global data. We can ingest and transact and understand and find insights from more than 300 global data sources. We process or analyze multiple thousand, 60,000 dashboards, insight dashboards for clients on an annual basis across roughly 4,000 end users. We have great partners. Microsoft is one in terms of Microsoft Azure is our cloud-based data partner. Viva is also today a strong partner of ours with regard to Viva My Insights, Viva Suggestions, and Viva Services. We are a partner there as well. Our advanced analytics are all patient-centric. We understand behavior and patterns of patients. We can use that same technology to identify undiagnosed patients. We can map care pathways and care gaps of those patients. And clients, and I'll dive into this a little bit down the road on the slides, but as you can imagine, clients use this in multiple ways to further expand their markets, on the marketing multi-channel side in the digital world, on the Salesforce effectiveness side, not just for sizing and structure and targeting segmentation, but more along the lines of what is that message to Dr. Smith at what point in time, and to what degree of certainty will I see an expansion of that market over time. So it becomes a pretty deep piece of information, but simplified for those out in the field. Our experience, as I mentioned, runs wide and deep. We've done alignment work for clients globally for 25 some odd years collectively. We've delivered a number of Salesforce size and structure alignment targeting projects in the US and Europe across specialty, pharmacy, primary care, anywhere from small sales forces to large. I bring that up only because it's not something that we spend a lot of time on, but it's worth mentioning as in today's world with pharma constantly looking to adjust the messaging and the effort and to further expand their market, they need to look at different ways to target, segment, and align. It's not the same old world of just targeting and alignment based on volume. There's a number of factors that go into the valuation these days of geographies, institutions, and obviously HCPs. Our SCIO expert consulting team is deep with clinical, technical, and of course the advanced analytics expertise. That's our delivery arm to our life sciences clients, our partners, to our life sciences partners on a global basis. In terms of SCIO as a company, yes, I head up the life sciences commercial side of the business, and it's a very robust and quickly growing space for us. And we work with 8 of the top 15 clients in that space globally. But we also have other verticals, larger or equally as large, that we focus with payer and PBMs, for example. We work with 60 plus health plans. We transact and analyze 130 million member lives on an annual basis. There's terabytes of data that are being processed through our systems. We work with 3 of the top 5 PBMs. Then we also spend a lot of time working with providers and health services. We work with 30 plus providers, health services, and ACOs, and 3,800 or so IDN networks, including one of the largest brokers. The reason why it's important is that it shows the continuum of care that we understand and how that translates into today's challenges of market expansion in life sciences from both a marketing and sales perspective, but also from a perspective of understanding and partnering more closely with payers and providers around risks and outcomes. because as we talk about expansion could be defined by clients in a number of ways. So we'll take a little bit more of a tactical dive on that in just a moment. I believe we're going to come up on our first poll question before I continue.
Thanks, John. We certainly welcome the audience to participate in these polling questions. And polling question number 1 reads as follows. Which market segment represents your primary focus? A, office-based physicians, B, hospitals, C, specialty clinics, for example, oncology, D, long-term care facilities, E, none of the above, or F, all of the above. Please cast your vote. Interesting. It seems like our audience is focusing on the hospital and specialty clinics, for example, oncology. Thank you very much for participating in polling question number 1. John, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you again for responses on those polls, on that poll. So let's talk about a little bit about patient personas. What are they? What does it mean? What does it mean to SCIO? And how we discuss this in depth with our clients. So, personas mean a lot to different folks, but they really drive the broad analytics of SCIO and how we have our clients thinking about patients and providers, institutions, etc. So when you look at a patient or a persona type, there's a number of attributes that go into valuing that patient. It's not just demographics, it's not just socioeconomic factors, and it's not just clinical factors. It's behavior and attitudinal data, understanding what triggers drive a patient's, or I should say a persona's behavior in terms of seeking care, following up with care, adherence and or compliance. Obviously, demographic attributes, socioeconomic attributes play a role. It's a component of that. Clinical factors, truly understanding a patient's current condition, number of comorbid conditions, care gaps that are driving the thought process and treatment of those conditions, cost and quality, how often do these patients visit the hospital and or the physician's office? Are they compliant or adherent with their diagnostic testing, yes or no, and or a drug regimen? Utilization, obviously utilization of those services carries into the cost and quality part. And what that segues into is what we call risk. So risk, and again, this conversation we have with a number of clients, risk means a lot, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially in this time and age. But as we define risk, and as our clients define risk means what is the risk of a patient persona. So we're talking number of patients scattered across the U.S. down to the zip code that have common attributes of demographics, behaviors and attitudes, and clinical factors. What is the risk of that patient or those patients becoming healthier or sicker over time? And that's defined as what do they look like in the next 12 months? So it is a predictive model, naturally based on a concurrent model of understanding where they are today, but then projecting out where are they headed. And how that risk is derived is a number of which care gaps are open and or potentially going to be closed in that next 12-month window due to the patient's care. What is the associated cost with those care gaps? Is it increasing or decreasing over time? Ultimately, we'll create a metric called high, medium, or low risk, something very simplified. We can also create deciles of risk at the patient level. But then truly understand if there is a patient that has high risk in the category for diabetes, as an example. It's not going to be the whole diabetes population. Let's just say that roughly 10% of the diabetes population is at high risk. Obviously, in today's world, that would be a large number of patients across the U.S. They have similar socioeconomic and demographic attributes, similar cost and quality attributes, clinical factors, etc. So they look and feel the same. So there's a batch of patients that you can presumably have the same behaviors and attitudes that you can presumably message to or look toward to drive care in a better direction. But that's not, that in and of itself won't carry it for you. Another component that we create is called impactability. So when you think about risk drives what are the patients at risk and how is their healthcare utilization increasing or decreasing over time. Hence, what are the costs? Why will they be non-adherent and or compliant, therefore driving up cost of care across the board? But then you also look at a measure around behaviors and attitudes called impactability. How impactable are those patients? What are the specific triggers that will enable those patients to move? Now, that message can come a couple different ways. It could come directly through the payer, which I won't say or profess today that they do a great job of doing, but I guess they would say the same thing. It could come directly from a DTC campaign through life sciences, obviously, and that's not a be-all, end-all. Or it could come through a collaboration between life sciences, payers, and providers. And that's the sort of the universe of really where you see cost and quality being driven down today. And ultimately what happens in that is when you think of market expansion, that also drives adherence and compliance of a client's drug itself. So ultimately, if you can identify who the patients have the highest amount of risk, that are the highest impactable based patients, and then you appropriate the right messages to those folks through the life sciences channel, i.e. the provider, the healthcare provider, the institution. It could be also some type of regional type messaging. You can single-handedly start to see how that risk score can be moving in the appropriate direction for those patients. What this looks like, as an example, balanced adults. I jokingly love to use this example because it's always the smallest number of patients in the U.S. There's not many of us balanced adults out there. But looking at a balanced adult, prospective risk, high, impactability score, high. What socioeconomic demographics look like? It's predominantly female, college degreed, median age 42, and they sit in that sort of 50 to 100K level in terms of spending. But then over to the left, we have clinical attributes. Now, not all of them. Obviously, this slide it's not able to show everything, but we've got a number of clinical attributes, including inpatient utilization, ER utilization, number of chronic conditions. And we've got some dollar amounts attributable to those. We've got some scores and or metrics or scorecard attributable to those clinical attributes. Ultimately, there's a lot of metrics that we provide to our clients behind the scenes that could be sliced and diced in a number of ways. But ultimately, it rolls up to that prospective risk score and impactability score. And they want a scorecard. They want to know how can I penetrate the patient population, and what does that mean from an impact of care, and does it drive my expansion of my messaging and of my medication compliance and adherence across the board. Conversely, with the payer, they're looking for that same conversation. Of course, they're looking to drive costs down. They're looking for lower inpatient utilization, lower ER utilization, lower number of chronic conditions, and better handled. So there's a partnership there that further drives expansion between the two organizations. So, with that said, I can talk for days on this. We'll talk about tactics in just a moment, but I'm going to hand it off to Mark to take a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of the personas and the metrics around them as well.
Thanks, John. To follow up on the previous slide that John just talked about, this particular slide here is an example of the personas and some of the metrics that we actually calculate for each of the persona types during our back-end analysis. And this slide represents 7 personas, but depending on the data set and therapeutic area that we're analyzing, we may have fewer or more personas. For example, we might have 4 or 5 personas, or we might have 9 or 10 personas. It really is based on the actual data and the therapeutic area. For example, rare diseases might have fewer personas, and other disease areas might have more personas. But some of the metrics that we're looking at, as John mentioned here, would include things like number of chronic conditions, the inpatient utilization, emergency room utilizations, inpatient per member per month payments, ER per member per month payments. And certainly there are many other additional metrics we calculate as well. Kind of think of this as kind of the back end analysis that comes up with that prospective risk score that John mentioned on the previous slide. As you can see by the risk legend up at the top left corner of the slide, the color of each symbol represents the medium risk score, and the size of the symbol represents the volume of the metric per individual cluster. So if we look at one of these, for example, the high cost baby boomers up in the far right corner, we can see that that particular metric, number of chronic conditions for high cost baby boomers, are both very high in the risk score and high in the actual number of chronic conditions. So if that's a particular segment that you need to focus on for whatever reason, now we know what their risk score and chronic conditions are. So by looking at the particular table here, you can identify both the predominant risk scores and the utilization or cost associated with each of the persona types. But typically we would provide a single scorecard, if you will, or risk value per persona type. However, we do have the ability to provide much granular level data as well based on the client's needs. John, any other comments to add to that?
No, other than just want to, again, state, as Mark pointed out, there's a lot of data that goes into building the persona models, but ultimately it rose up to that scorecard, that one or two scores. But obviously you can open that up to understand, what are the drivers that are contributing to that score. So that's what that previous slide was really showing.
Great. You can go on to the next slide, John. Thanks. This map is an example of the primary persona type by CBSA, or core-based statistical area. There are approximately 950 or so CBSAs across the country, which are defined by the U.S. Government Office of Management and Budget. In this map, the personas are represented by the colors in the legend. For example, healthy affluent is the dark green. So we can see where those areas are throughout the country. And again, this is just an example of persona types. Certainly they would vary based on the type of therapeutic area and analysis that we're performing. But that's an example. You can see that the healthy affluent are predominantly in the coasts, the Northeast and West Coast, and some of the central areas of the country as well. You'll also notice that there are white areas throughout the country, meaning that there are no CBSAs throughout the country. But we actually define personas at the 5-digit zip code level, which then makes it very easy to aggregate the personas to different levels of geography. This would include custom areas defined by a pharma's sales, marketing, or managed market teams. Again, 5-digit zip code levels easily aggregated up to some other level of geography, really based on what your specific needs are throughout the country. Anything to add there, John?
Nope.
As personas are built from zip codes, we have access to the healthcare providers and facilities that are practicing in a zip code. Hence, we will be able to assign a predominant persona type to an HCP or facility as well. This allows us to further enhance valuing or scoring healthcare providers or facilities. Accurately value an HCP or facility for personal or non-personal promotions in combination with knowing the HCP's persona type optimizes the brand, sales, or managed markets team ability to provide the right message to the right HCP or facility at the right time. So this slide is an example of developing a scorecard in the process that summarizes the steps, including identifying the relevant data, which could be a combination of HCP or patient-level data. For example, we have there market RX or diagnosed patients, adoption sequence, market access information. There's a variety of different metrics that can be included into how we value an HCP or a facility. So in general, we would identify, based on the client's needs, what those data sources might be. We then identify what the appropriate metrics might be for the analysis. We would do some mathematical scaling of the metrics behind the scenes, and then we would create this composite score. And the key to that is to weight each metric individually. So, for example, we might choose to weight diagnosis to treatment ratio, for example, as a third of the overall score, which would have a higher weight or volume to the overall composite metric. And then finally, we typically would decile the score, and that's just an easy to read and understand value 1 through 10 for each HCP or facility. And then again, with the combination of knowing what the persona type is for that individual HCP or facility and this composite valuation score of the facility, both used in conjunction, you can really provide a powerful measure to either target or promote your products and services to those either HCPs or facilities. John, anything else there?
No, the only thing I would add is that no two clients are alike in terms of how they define market expansion. Some clients look at this type of methodology at the HCP level. Some other clients look at this at the institutional level. And some clients look at this geographically speaking, which we'll show you an example of next. Point of the matter is that when they think of market expansion, it comes in a number of different ways to think it through, how it's measured, and what the applicable scorecard of metrics look like. Beauty is we've had the experience to work with all clients in those three buckets. And again, the next example, we'll dive into it. We've had years of experience doing it with HCPs, obviously, but today it's more and more institution-based. We're also seeing this type of metric being applied, or we're applying it, I should say, to IDNs and ACOs. We've got clients in the managed market strategy side of the world thinking about how do I come up with a concrete message and plan when I speak to the IDN at the top level that cascades down to the ultimate risk taker, the provider, and what their opportunity looks like and how to further expand on that opportunity. And in that case, opportunity naturally to show the measurement of their particular drug, all while driving up adherence compliance, because again, that risk taker in the bottom of the pyramid, he or she is the one sort of driving the care. So if that messaging comes from the top down, it generally helps. So it's all I wanted to share. Mark, I'll jump into the next example.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, so as John said, this map here is kind of diving down into a metropolitan area. This happens to be the Houston CBSA, and we're actually showing the predominant persona types at the zip code level. So as we said earlier, we can show personas at many different types of levels of geography, but since they're built from zip codes, that's kind of our core way of showing the personas within a particular area. So this, again, similar to the previous map, each color represents the predominant persona types, by zip code. So we can see the orange users or the high utilizers there, kind of in the center of the Houston CBSA area, for example, and the healthy and affluent persona types predominantly kind of surrounding in the outer metro area, if you will. Also, as we mentioned previously, the personas are built from a variety of patient-level attributes. Those are listed again up at the top left-hand corner, including behaviors and attitudes and clinical factors and so forth. But what we can also do, and is in addition, is overlay client-provided data as well to further enhance the personas. So these can include information on providers or payers or KOLs and many other different types of client-provided data. And the key here is allowing us to take our own methodology and our own patient-level data, and in combination with client-provided data, we can then achieve enhanced and very targeted persona types. So again, the goal here is zip code-based personas based on SCIO'S methodology and data, but again, enhancing that potentially with client-provided data as well. And John, I'll pass it off to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I think that leads us to our second polling question.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark. The second polling question reads as follows. What is your primary challenge when it comes to achieve commercial excellence? Finding undiagnosed patients, enhancing patient compliance, influencing HCPs to switch to your product, proving the value of your drug, or all of the above? Please cast your votes now. Interesting. It looks like one of the key tactics in driving commercial excellence and expanding the market is finding those newly undiagnosed patients. Thank you for your contribution. John, Mark, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Al. Thanks again, everybody, for the response in the second poll. No surprise. You should see my next slide here in terms of tactical applications. The first bullet, talk about good timing, identify newly diagnosed patient potential to increase market share. I would say that no shortage of 50% of the conversations we have today are around two of the same topics. One is, please help me better understand the current patient population from a persona perspective. Who are they? What do they look like? What are their triggers, clinical conditions, etc.? Give me that scorecard. But secondarily, right behind that is, can you find more patients like this for me that are not diagnosed, that are sitting in these similar patient persona segments? Short answer is yes. We do that. Like anything else, I think when we bump into the ultra rare disease space, like everybody else, the data thins out, becomes so I think from a soundness of the model, I think our data scientists would say that the R values are strong. Therefore, strong in the sense of predicting what that patient population could look like, where they're at. But nonetheless, we always go full disclosure. But we haven't had any issues thus far in helping clients identify the undiagnosed or the propensity of the undiagnosed population. We also drive understanding the conditions around noncompliance. Noncompliance is a big issue. In some cases, just a couple percentage points of compliance, adherence, and compliance can mean a significant bump in a budget forecast for a client. Naturally, go behind the scenes in terms of operational understanding, segmentation of targets, HCPs, institutions, geographies, and expanding on that is valuable. The key pattern of understanding the behaviors of the smaller risk-based personas, we're truly in, for lack of a better word, a micro-targeting environment. The data allows for that. I often advise clients that don't try to solve for the whole, non-small cell lung cancer population, for example. It's not that complicated. You want to look at a subset of that and what the data allows us to look at, and then drive behaviors and attributes from that. You'll find that a good 20% of the population will drive, in fact, 80% of the behavior and attributes of the other 80%. So that becomes very interesting, and it's truly data-driven. It's not qualitative. But the qualitative component can come from the internal client's knowledge, feet on the street, obviously market research. Managed market strategy or strategic initiatives. 50% of our conversations today around outcomes and risks, and helping identify who that patient population is, coming to an agreement between the two organizations, between the payer and our clients, the life sciences clients, and then of course aligning to some type of risk or outcome that makes sense and is meaningful in that next 12-month window, realistic. We've had too many conversations with clients that have gone, they shot the moon, if you will. They took up the driver and they've tried to drive that green every single time, and they've ended up in the water. And both sides are, it's a failure on both sides. But we've been brought in to sort of help and fix and clean that up. It's a long process. It's the reality of it. And then, technologically speaking, clients take and ingest this information in different ways. In some client cases, we're just pushing data back and forth under the covers behind the scenes in a secure manner, of course, and that then flows into their systems internally. In other ways, some of these insights are being pushed through the Viva channels, or the Viva pipes, I should say, the suggestions engine or the Viva My Insights down to the field level. Naturally, all of that is as applicable, as needed, as approved by regulatory compliance. Again, if it's just scorecard-based information, it helps aid in that conversation with that institution and or with that provider. So just a couple of ideas and tactical applications. As you can imagine, there's a lot more. We like to try to bucket these. And then just thinking out loud, common use cases, obviously multi-channel marketing, sort of the digital experience today, what digital channels work best, and how can I be ensured that is driving adherence, compliance, and identification of those patients through my digital channels. Patient segments by CBSA, that's an easy sales tactic. I'd like to say we've been doing this for years, not to this degree of certainty and or complexity, but that will never go away. That's the reality of it. But it helps aid in that conversation with the HCP or institution when you have something new and insightful around the patient to share. Contracting around managed market strategy, again, it puts the alignment of our clients in life sciences, the strategist on the managed market side, and that payer, that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee or Michigan, the agreement and alignment on who is the most at-risk population, where are they, where are more like them potentially, how do we address that situation, and how do we measure it? And it's really that simple. It's complicated, but it is that simple when you look at it on the first year. And then, of course, CRM suggestions. Again, what type of information can be disseminated to the field that could provide a value add at that HCP and or institutional level. And also beyond that sort of IDN strategy thought process. How do you paint that picture for market expansion to that IDN at the highest level so that they understand that, for lack of a better word, what care pathways are driving up or down care costs, and how does that play into the promotion of that particular drug by that manufacturer? Does it contribute? Does it contribute a high, medium, or low? What do the dollars look like? What does the patient look like? How can the provider ultimately drive better care and understanding and having this information at his or her fingertips that then, in fact, drive up ratings, your STAR, your HEDIS ratings. And that's important. We have some metric as well that we've created for clients that correlate provider rankings and metrics and institution ranking and metrics and patient care. It's very interesting when you look at that. There's sometimes an inverse relationship between the two and requires deeper dive insights. But that's valuable in today's universe, and it sort of is on everybody's frontal lobe. Before we open up for Q&A, I think we've got one more polling question, and then we'll open the floor. Mark, anything that I missed or that you'd like to add on the common use cases and or tactics?
No, John, I think you hit them all, or the predominant ones. There's just a lot of ways to use patient personas, and we're at the world now where we have to do analysis, at the individual consumer level, and that's what we're doing here with patient personas, which can be very, very, very valuable to pharma companies.
Thanks, Mark. So that being said, we'll before we roll into Q&A, we'll roll into polling question number 3.
Thanks, John. Polling question number 3 reads as follows. How would you use CIO's patient personas, including their risk and impactability scores? Segment patient populations differently? Adjust messaging to HCPs? Evaluate, prioritize HCPs or sites of care differently? Rethink call plans? Refine patient education tactics? And please, check all that apply for this particular question. So it seems as if our patient personas can be used in multiple applications, including adjusting messaging to the HCPs, evaluating and prioritizing the HCPs or sites of care that are called on, and looking at the patient education tactics and maybe rethinking them as well. Thank you, everyone, for answering that particular polling question. We will now be entering our question and answer session. Now, please, as a reminder, please submit your questions using the questions window located on the right side of your screen. But I will add, there is a particular question, real interesting, John or Mark. How would HCPs use this patient persona intelligence to enhance their practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's come up a number of times. And you know, one of the conversations that we've had, or a couple of conversations we've had with clients around that, is how does the patient persona type of detail, naturally, this is all de-identified. So we're talking generic segments, high-cost baby boomers, cost-conscious adults, balanced adults, quote unquote, and the sort of parameters of those patient types. One would think that an HCP and or a nurse practitioner in their office, when looking at a persona type, a segment itself, and a couple of key metrics about that patient, one would think that they would be able to correlate that almost immediately to the folks that they're seeing in the office that day. But that might not be the case. But one would think that will be a way to think about it. But that data, that insight conversation has been, how do we embed that into some type of EMR system? And is there a probability that patient John Smith is in fact a high-cost baby boomer? He or she meets this criteria. Hey, this is the type of messaging that you might want to, conversation you may want to have. John Smith has diabetes, COPD, excuse me, hypertension, tends to focus on COPD, not surprising, and tends to skip his or her medication for diabetes to once every 3 months. So what type of message could be disseminated in that? And it might be as simple as having that conversation of, well, each time you skip your diabetes medication, I think this is where the world is going. There's a, I don't want to call it a scare tactic. That's not the right word, but you know, I'll apply it to myself. I know when I'm in the doctor's office, I'm always nervous about everything, and I'm not that type of person. But as soon as they say, well, you know, your cholesterol was just a tick high, it scares the hell out of me. So then I you know, I'm not looking for medication at that point. I'm looking for ways in which to drive that down. But beyond that, my questions to the HCP are, if I don't drive that down, what are the repercussions? What don't I see that could happen to me over the next 12, 24, 36 months in terms of my overall health? Having those proactive conversations and guiding the physician to have those proactive conversations around the personas, I think that'll be the next phase of all of this. How it's disseminated, I don't know. Technologically speaking, EMR, could be some patient-centric app, combination of the two. But a lot of those conversations we're having today with clients is, in fact, how to get that messaging and that empower, if you will, that HCP with that type of insight.
Thanks, John. Another question. How are the insights from patient personas delivered? For example, is there a way to include such insights into my CRM system?
Hey, as Mark and John. Yeah, John, certainly add to it. But yeah, certainly we can. We work with our clients to find out what the most appropriate way to deliver and distribute the results could be. They could be as simple as providing flat files that then can be incorporated into a client's CRM solution. We have the ability to create customized dashboards, if you will, through our business intelligence data warehousing platforms. We can define other types of reports. So there's a multiple ways of providing the data. Again, it depends on the custom or the client's needs and how granular they want to have that data. It could be large volumes of data, or we just could be providing it by zip code with a simple score. So we certainly, as part of the process, work with our clients to determine what their actual needs are, and for all cases we can happily provide them with the data that meets those conditions.
I'll just add to that, Mark. Thank you. So since we are in fact a partner with Veeva, and we've done a number of integrations. What I mean by integrations, CO-based data and insights combined with CRM-based insights and data, and pushing them through some type of reporting function, whether it's third party, as Mark pointed out, that synchronizes with CRM, so you wouldn't know the difference, and or through the CRM itself. But in today's world, with Veeva My Insights, which we are in fact a certified partner of, soon to be announced in the next few days, happy to say, that is a great way that you can take all of that CRM data for the rep and put it into one singular tab. And that one singular tab can then disseminate information about both account, HCP, geographic area, calls, samples, whatever that might be applicable to their business, but then also patient personas. That might be a data feed that sits there. It's under the covers, again, very technical in nature, how it's moved back and forth between client and CO. But that insight could simply be, in this practice, 32% of the patient population tend to be high-cost baby boomers. Here's the 5 attributes of those baby boomers. 22% represent mid-aged, sports enthusiasts, right? A lot of breaks and falls, a lot of pulled muscles and whatnot. What are their attributes? That data on our side would be fed directly into that Veeva My Insights tab and be available. Obviously, the client will determine and disseminate what information gets pushed, but that's a great channel that in and of itself that could be valuable to our clients.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark. We have a third question. How effective are these personas? How effective would they be for other markets, for example, the UK or the EU?
I'm chuckling, and reason why. So just to be very blunt, we are in the process now with a handful of clients where we've been challenged over the last year of developing personas outside the U.S. France, for example, Germany, UK, to name 3 in particular. So we are in process of doing that as we speak. What we've learned along this process, and this is advice based on our chief medical officer, our clinical staff, and our data scientists. When you're looking at the actual condition of the patient, so the clinical attributes of that diabetes patient, whether you are, and I'm not talking about access to care and how they seek care, it's more about the clinical mechanism of how diabetes affects one's, a person that's diagnosed with it, their comorbid conditions. That information, we can source that naturally through the claims data in the U.S., unavailable to us outside the U.S. But that clinical pathway is the same whether I'm a diabetes patient in Boston, Massachusetts, or I'm in Frankfurt, Germany. Again, how I access care is different. That's put that off to the side. So from a clinical nature, I can look at claims data and identify the clinical nature and pathway of a diabetes patient. What separates, outside of the access to care, what separates me in Boston to that person in Frankfurt, my cohort, if you will, in Frankfurt, is going to be socioeconomic and demographic attributes. Now, in the U.S., there's a plethora of data available to us that we can identify and use for socioeconomic, demographic attributes and insights. That same data, for the most part, exists in most countries outside the world. So we do have a mapping process that allows us to take the socioeconomic and demographic attributes of a patient in the U.S. at the zip code level and transpose that and map it, I should say, to those patients in a postal code in Frankfurt, Berlin, Paris, etc., which then gives them, our ex-US clients, some visibility and insight on a patient from a clinical perspective of utilizing the claims data, but socioeconomically based on their localized data. That gives, and why I was chuckling on the front end of that is, in the U.S., it's valuable and powerful information at the patient level. We have a 95% or 92% degree of certainty that these patients look and feel this way, they act this way, high degree of certainty. Outside the U.S., because we have that extrapolation of socioeconomic and demographic data in that mapping, we're in that 60% mark, 60, 65%, which I often say, isn't 65% of understanding who these patients are down in these postal codes better than having 5% of what you have today, which might be a sample of surveying some patients and gaining some insight around practitioners? Short answer to the question always is yes. And it can always be further augmented with primary market research. So long story short, we do have a way to extrapolate personas from the U.S. to various parts of the world at the postal code level, and it becomes a very valuable tool to understand market expansion, market planning, and market penetration beyond what they're doing today. Someday I hope the patient level data is available. It's not. Until that day comes, this is a great way that clients are adapting of ways to think about personas.
Thank you, John. Great answer. I don't believe we have any other questions from the audience at this point in time. I'd like to thank the audience for taking the time to join us today. If you'd like someone from SCIO to contact you about what you've seen today, please visit the Contact Us page on our website. As a reminder, today's session was recorded and will be sent along to you in the coming days. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.